Good morning, I'm Bill Potter. I'm the University Librarian, and I'd like to welcome you to this year's Georgia Writers Hall of Fame recognition ceremony. We have a very full program today, so I'm going to be as brief as possible. But you can't hear? Is that on? I hear a thump. How's that? Can you hear me now? Okay. As I was saying, we have a very full program, so I'm going to be very brief. But I'd first off like to recognize the families of this year's inductees and thank them for attending today. If you maybe just stand up or wave your hands when I mention the writer. The family of Caroline Miller. If you could stand up, maybe stand up and make more of an impression even. Then we have the family of Farrell Sams. If you could stand up. The family of Celestine Sibley. The family of Ann Rivers Siddons. Okay, all together. And finally, the family of John Stone. Again, I want to thank the families especially for coming today. I'd also like to just recognize briefly the Board of Judges and ask that they stand up after I finish naming them all. First, Mary Adams, the First Lady of the University. Mary Ellen Brooks, the Director of the Harvard Library. Stephen Corey, the Editor of the Georgia Review. Terry Kay, of course, a renowned author and a member, an inductee of the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. And I should point out also the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame was actually his idea. Shell Knox, erstwhile alumna and past chair of the University of Georgia Foundation. Nicole Mitchell, Director of the University of Georgia Press. Dr. Hugh Ruppersberg, Professor of English and Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences, and one of the foremost expert on Georgia writers, and just recently, it hasn't been announced yet, I guess, but he's also been named a recipient of the Governor's Humanities Award. Sidney Samuel Thomas, a retired librarian. Jane Wilson from Albany, one of the university's great benefactors. And then several judges who can't be with us today, Julie Hunt, university trustee and former regent. Dr. John Inscoe, professor of history and editor of the New Georgia Encyclopedia. Pat Conroy, member of the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame who could not travel, but his wife was with us today. And Dr. Jamil Zamaljan, head of the Georgia Humanities Council. But those judges who are here today could stand, I'd appreciate it. The judges who are here today will be meeting after lunch to decide on next year's inductees. And it's always a spirited discussion. I'm looking forward to that. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Skip Hewlett, the head of the Georgiana Collection and the coordinator of the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame, to actually introduce the introducers and get this thing going. Skip.
Thanks, Bill. Good morning. Thanks for all coming, finding your parking places, finding your way here, and we hope that however long you've been here, whether it's since yesterday or this morning, that we're providing you with good UGA hospitality. I hope that it's a gift for all of you to be here to help us recognize a wonderful group of Georgia writers. And it's my privilege as a coordinator of this program basically to put a fancy name on what I do as a normal course of duties for a librarian in charge of selecting Georgia titles. And this is a library program. It started out as a library program in the millennial year of 2000 with the idea, well stoked by our judge and past inductee Terry Kay, among others, that Georgia writers never get enough recognition, for that matter, here and abouts for all the things that they do for us, but also for the sort of selfish reason that as a library with 4 million titles, that one of the large parts of our duty here is to provide researchers and scholars, both here at the university, but throughout the state of Georgia. We're a land-grant university after all, and our responsibility is to the citizens, but to provide them with the materials necessary to understand, or to try to understand, and to try to convey a sense of the history, the culture, the people of the state of Georgia, what it was, what it is, what it's becoming. And for that, in 2000, we decided what better way than to focus on Georgia writers. The Georgiana collection, every year it's my responsibility to collect titles from across the spectrum of library works, whether it's from general history to zoology, but always, for me, the most enjoyable part is selecting the fiction, the poetry, the essays, the letters of the writers who, whether they were here for 6 weeks like a Gene Toomer and found some part of their background and their heritage and conveyed it to the rest of America and the world in literature, or whether they always lived here, always wrote here, and did nothing but write and seek, to explore the mysteries in their own writing that is the state of Georgia and its people. It's always a tremendous joy. This past year, just in the course of the duties that I have here, I was able to, because of the 5 honorees we have this year, one of the things that it does is it focuses for me what is otherwise, for a disorganized personality, a very good target area of who I need to focus on, and because there's always an area of the collection that I can supplement. Whether they wrote 50 years ago, there's a republication. Whether they wrote 20 years ago and it's been translated into some Scandinavian language, or whether they're writing this year and I have to make sure that I get the paperback when it comes out, or whether I'm helping my boss, Mary Ellen Brooks, the head of the Harvard Library, look at folks for whom manuscripts, correspondence, diaries, things of that sort need to be protected. The Georgia Writers Hall of Fame list and the judges' selections always sort of concentrate my attention on who can I look at this year to begin with when I start spending the state's money. And this year, I was able to add, just for the honorees we have today, for the late Caroline Miller and Celestine Sibley, for Dr. Sams and Dr. John Stone, and Ann Rivers Siddons. I've been able to select 40 titles, both of translations, new editions, and so forth, and it's a joy just to see these arrive, and head for the shelves of the Georgiana collection and be used by the scholars and the students who are here. For rare books, which Mary Ellen also allows me to select for every once in a while, I was able to find what was an Albatross Continental Library edition, which is a scarce European paperback version that only came out during the middle of the 20th century, of Lamb in His Bosom, the famous Pulitzer Prize winning novel by our honoree Caroline Miller, and 2 uncorrected proof editions of books by the revered Atlanta journalist, essayist, novelist Celestine Sibley. And I don't focus just on the current nominees. This year we also were able to acquire manuscript, typescript of Prince of Tides by past inductee and current judge Pat Conroy, Alice Walker's latest book, multiple limited editions, old and new, by Bacon County's writer Harry Cruz, the very newsworthy, some would say controversial, very informative, most recent publication by President Jimmy Carter, Peace Not Apartheid, as well as just a few weeks ago, I finally got around to realizing that our own Terry Kay had written a foreword to a novel by Jeff Fields, Cry of Angels. And so I was able to acquire all these, plus books by current nominees who haven't yet, but eventually are likely to follow our inductees in. Books by Augusta Evans Wilson, Bailey White, who I was having a conversation this morning with Dr. Sams about, the late Ossie Davis, Georgia Douglas Johnson, Eugenia Price, and Mac Hyman, all Georgia writers for whom we're very grateful and expect to honor pretty soon. As well as likely or eligible nominees this year. The Georgiana Collection added titles by Don West and Sam Jones, names that you may not be familiar with, but at different times in Georgia history have been very important and continue to be for researchers and students important sources of information about the way Georgians see the world and the world sees Georgia. Other titles by Pearl Cleage, Judson Mitchum, this past year's 2006, one of the few two-time Townsend Award winners for literature. Civil War correspondent Peter Wellington Alexander. Not exactly a household name, but I encourage you to look into it. A very interesting person. The author of the Time Machine Man mysteries, Jacques Futrelle. Not a lot of heads nodding on that one, but I believe he went down on the Titanic and wrote a series of novels for which were bestsellers at the turn of the century, as well as this year living and very productive writers, Van Brock, Sue Monk Kidd, and Charlene Hunter Galt. Been some of the more recent titles that have come out that I was able to acquire this year. So it's a fertile ground, and it never stops moving for the Georgiana Collection, and the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame has been a big gift to me as a bibliographer, as a librarian, for trying to pick and isolate and identify these titles. I also want to note before I go on to our first honoree, with regret we noted the passing of nominee William Bill Deal, who passed away this past November, and I'm sure was known to a number, particularly those who were aware of Atlanta in the 1960s and 70s, as well as his later career after being a journalist, also a photographer, being a novelist, reached considerable international fame and Hollywood-inspired fame in the 70s and 80s. So without further ado, it's also my pleasure today to mention that though we're in this wonderful building that Dr. Potter was instrumental in helping to see constructed and delivered here for the students, and the wonderful airy space that we can make use of, I like to tell everybody, I work up on the hill in the small place, but the place where most of the 4 million volumes still sit waiting for us to use them, and where there's also an exhibit today. The last couple of days, it's been going on for a couple of weeks, which we in the Hargrett Library were able to construct of honoring currently the 29 inductees of the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. So you'll see mentioned on the back of your program, and there's an exhibit, and I invite all of you, if you have the chance today or in the next day or two. After that, time moves on quickly. We've got a Civil War exhibit going up after that we always do for the university's one of the rarest possessions, which is the Confederate Constitution, for that, which is up for 2 weeks, to be followed at the end of April, throughout the month of May, by our perhaps what's kept me busiest this past year, which is our acquisition, of the papers of Bacon County's own Harry Crews, where we have the manuscripts, the letters, and other memorabilia of Mr. Crews. So get up to the Hargrett Library. This is a wonderful building, wonderful facility, great for nowadays, but the books and everything and where we work is up on the hill. And it's a hard but a small walk. Chantel, who put everything together here today and who's really to honor, is telling me to move things along. And so you see, she has a very difficult job, as you see already. Moving me along is a difficult job. But today I'd like to be it's my privilege to introduce our first inductee. And actually, the late Caroline Miller award is going, we have a number of, like you saw, family members here today. And the Reverend Jackson Brady, Ms. Miller's nephew, is going to be my victim in introducing you to the recipients, who include other family members who will be receiving the award on behalf of Ms. Miller. If I can take just a minute, our current biography page that went up this week states that Caroline Miller, with a native's love for the characters she created, captured the imagination of readers at home and abroad when she recreated with striking lyricism and historical South Georgia and its peoples. For me personally, when I came here in 1999, I was pointed by the letters of Margaret Mitchell, whose materials we have in the Hargard Library, toward this author of whom I confess I had not heard, but who was America's big notice that Georgia literature and novels were something to be paid attention to in 1934 when she won the Pulitzer Prize, when Lamb in His Bosom was at the very top of the bestsellers list, and then it took the Prix Femina, Frances High Literary Honor, all at one time. It's an ironic part of history that by calling such attention to her native Georgia, Caroline Miller invited the attentions of Macmillan editor Harold Latham, who came down here hunting southern Georgia woman novelist and ended up with a lady named Margaret Mitchell, who had a manuscript to sell, which then took the imagination again. And in the tidal wave that became Gone with the Wind, sort of put to Caroline Miller, perhaps, a sort of welcome respite from the fame that was hers before that. But what I found out in reading this book, and I'll pass it on to Reverend Brady very quickly. Caroline Miller's novel, Lamb in His Bosom, she published two. The second one was, of course, was several years later, and unhappily for her, over-edited, came out during the middle of the war, didn't receive the attention nor the acclaim that Lamb in His Bosom did. But if for no other reason, the state of Georgia and the people of the United States, of the South, of wherever, have a huge homage and debt to Caroline Miller, I found. If for nothing other than the things such as C.N. Carver's striking recollections, ideas of what it was like to be a young woman and growing into her life in South Georgia, Appling County area, the Pine Barrens, the area between Baxley and Darien in the first half of the 19th century, which she was able to do in startling detail, capture everybody's imagination outside. But, pardon the verbiage, but it's a striking novel. My own mom came here from North Carolina and has always, you know, sort of regretted her loss. I was reminded when I read Lamb in His Bosom about Vince Carver and seeing C.N.'s mother talking about how, with bittersweet regret, they came to Georgia in the early half of the 19th century. And their depiction of this part of their memory struck for me a chord for my own mom and dad, who found a place in Middle Georgia in the middle of the 20th century. It's a timeless book. It's a startling book. You know, Jake, C.N.'s young brother, talking about those nights at the campfire with the men who had to every year go to sell agricultural goods down on the coast of Georgia, listening to the sounds, the cicadas, the smells of the fires, listening to people, the storytelling that went on. These are things that are timeless and triumphant. And I knew that I discovered something at that time. So like I said, without further ado, it's my privilege today to turn it over to Reverend Brady and to honor with the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame the memory of Caroline Miller. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my privilege and pleasure today to present to you members of the family of Caroline Miller, who left us about 15 years ago. Caroline had 5 children. The first 4 of her children were all boys. She wanted a little girl, and someone said to her, "Have a little patience." Her 5th child was a girl, and she named her Patience. Caroline's 2 sisters had only 1 child each. I'm Jackson Pafford Brady, carrying my mother's surname and Caroline's original name. I'm the only child of her eldest sister. And today, my mother, whose ring I'm wearing, always called Caroline by the same name throughout their lives. She called her Sunshine. Clyde H. Ray III is a professor of history and an author himself, and is now Caroline Miller's only surviving child. Mark Rowan Miller is an attorney, and he is the son of Caroline's oldest child, who in the dedication of Lamb in His Bosom is referred to as Little Bill. Joanne Lott Bishop is the only child of Caroline's 2nd sister. She represents all of Caroline's devoted nieces and nephews. Joanne has dedicated herself to preserving the legacy of Caroline Miller. I think we can borrow the title of another author's work and say that for her, Caroline Miller is her magnificent obsession. They will each speak to you in turn. Thank you very much. This award and recognition is for her first novel, Lamb in His Bosom. But it should also be for something much more than that. It should also be for the 60 years that followed, in which she continued to engage and to enrich and to enlighten every life that came in contact with her. For that recognition, we thank you, and she thanks you.
Mark Miller, Jacksonville, Florida. My father should be here today instead of myself, but he passed about a year ago. But if he were here today, he would not speak of himself. He would not speak of anything other than to thank you, Joanne, for keeping his mother's name out there, letting people know what type of person she was, and your just hours and hours of dedication. And I think he would also like to thank Margaret Quinlan of Peachtree Publishing for really taking on a great writer and a great book and making sure that everyone can still cherish what she had to offer us. My father would also say that I knew her for the first 20 years of my life, and it's amazing when you grow up with somebody who purportedly is famous. We never knew her as a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist. She was just our grandmother. And it was It was an honor to know her, and my father would say that above all, in troubling times, she was a wonderful, wonderful mother to all of her children. Thank you.
Good morning. I would like to tell you about my Aunt Caroline Miller's trip to New York City to receive the Pulitzer Prize for her novel, Lamb in His Bosom, and the reception she received when she returned home to her hometown of Baxley, Georgia. On Monday, May the 7th, 1934, she traveled by train to New York City to receive the award of Pulitzer Prize for her novel. Her New York publishers had not met her, so she wired them and told them that when she arrived at the train station, she would have her hat in her hand so they could recognize her. So when an auburn-haired young woman, looking more like a teenager, appeared with her little black hat in hand, she was immediately identified by her publisher and literary agent waiting at the gate. That night, the official ceremony was held at Columbia University. Caroline, on accepting her award, explained how she came to be included in such a prestigious group. Dressed in her long red evening gown, she told the audience that she felt like Cinderella. The success of her book seemed to her like a fairy tale. This was her first novel, and she was just as surprised over its success as the literary critics had been. She said that almost every incident in the book had actually happened. As she had tended her young family, she began to wonder how her mother and grandmother had managed their larger families with seemingly less effort. She began research to find the secret of their success and wrote a book about what she learned. A book that won the highest literary honor given in the United States. The next day, she curled up in an armchair in her hotel room and talked with newspaper reporters all day. She shared with them how she had collected material for her book. She and her 3 young sons, Billy, 5, and 3-year-old twins, Nip and Tuck, well, that's what they were to us all of their lives, scouted the countryside looking to buy fresh eggs and chickens, which was a common occurrence during that period of time. On these excursions, she became friends with these farm folk and collected stories about their ancestors. She recorded these details, and they were interwoven into her story. By the end of the day, these reporters were describing Caroline Miller as that charming young woman from South Georgia. The rest of the week was a whirl of luncheons, dinners, and teas honoring the Pulitzer winners, photo shoots with the New York photographers, Broadway plays, and of course, shopping for gifts to take back home. I treasure the mink muff and collar she brought home to me. On Friday, she traveled all day by train on her way home, expecting to be picked up at the depot by her husband and sons. Instead, more than 1,000 Baxley citizens met her at the station. A parade led by the high school band escorted the family, who rode in an ox cart, to their home. More than 50 cars filled with excited fans joined in the parade. A huge banner reading "Home of Caroline Miller" stretched across Main Street. American flags lined the street. Posters welcoming Caroline home were displayed in all the storefront windows. All of Baxley had turned out to welcome their beloved heroine back to Georgia. Caroline Miller had come home. I think that today would have been a very wonderful day for her to be here. The dream of her youth was to attend the University of Georgia and to study drama. That was her primary interest during her years in high school. Both of her parents had died when she was 16, and her family were the 6 older siblings in her in the family. She lived with the 2 sisters, my mother and Jackson's mother. They were all single, and she came to the University of Georgia during her senior year when she competed in the literary meet, the high school literary meet, and participated in oral interpretation, where she won 2nd place in the state. She was always outstanding in any area that she competed in. And after she married and moved to Waynesville, she would go with her husband, who was a florist, to flower competitions, arranging flowers, with many professional florists in the competition. And she was the one who won the first ribbon, the blue ribbon. And she said that was as wonderful to her as winning the Pulitzer Prize. But she, I think after she married and moved to Baxley, there was not much opportunity for her to pursue her interest in dramatics, and that is when she turned to writing and was amazingly successful at her second choice. I asked my father one day, it seemed sort of impossible to imagine a little small town girl going into the area of dramatics. And I asked him how they felt about her interest in drama. And he said he had followed her career all of her life and was a great advocate of her abilities. He said, "Oh, we thought she would be at least as successful in drama as she was in writing." So that's the kind of person Caroline Miller was. Thank you.
And now to present our next award is judge of the Writers Hall of Fame, Shell Knox.
Thank you, Skip, and I hope those in the back can hear me. I have a school teacher's voice, so probably without this. Can you hear me? I see a thumbs up there. If you'll allow me a quick moment of personal privilege, it is such a joy to see so many family members and friends of our inductees here today. I had the opportunity to meet some of you last night, and it's just wonderful to see all those who stood. And also for the wonderful person I get to introduce, Dr. and Mrs. Sams. Their children, they have one son here, they have 4 children. One is here with his wife, and last night I had the opportunity to meet a granddaughter who is here in the veterinary school at the University of Georgia. So we're delighted each of you are here for this exciting day honoring these inductees. Dr. Sams, a physician, humorist, storyteller, and best-selling novelist, Pharoah Sams is the author of 7 books. Most notable is his trilogy of novels in which an eccentric and quixotic hero, Porter Osmond Jr., mirrors Sam's own Georgia boyhood in Fayette County. All of his works are rooted in the oral traditions of Southern humor and folklore. With engaging and graceful prose, Sam's fiction celebrates love of land, the changing Southern landscape, and what he calls, quote, being raised right in the rural South. This is the beginning paragraph of the Pharoah Sams piece in the New Georgia Encyclopedia, and how well it sums up who the man is. Well, who is this man, Pharoah Sams? He was born in 1922 in a house built in 1848 by his great-grandfather, and I understand one of his sons lives in that home today. I'm not sure if that's still correct. He is one of 4 children of Pharoah Sams Sr., who was the superintendent of schools in Fayette County at that time, and Mildred Matthews, a graduate of Mercer Universities, one of our great universities here in the state. He split his medical education at Emory with a 4-year tour of duty in the U.S. Army Medical Corps. While at Emory, he met, as he would say, his first wife, Helen Fletcher. They married in 1948 and established a medical practice in Fayetteville, from which they both retired, I'm sure to much sadness, in 2006. If you, like I, were fortunate enough to grow up in a community that had a 24-hour-a-day physician of the ilk of Pharoah and Helen Sams, you were indeed lucky. They made house calls. I can even remember in my little hometown of the doctor coming and shaking down that thermometer by my bedside. Something that's gone from any known thing today, something unheard of today. Being well-trained, wise in the ways of the world, they were always trusted and believed, giving their all and doing their best. What more could one ask? I have read, when asked by a patient, how Dr. Sams intuitively knew something about him that this person was unaware that Dr. Sams would know. His reply, Dr. Sams replied, "I listen with my eyes as well as my ears." What a beautiful statement. Wouldn't we all like to have him as a family member or as a personal friend? I certainly would. When learning of my opportunity here today, I contacted Dr. Don Harp, Senior Minister of Peachtree Road Methodist Church in Atlanta. a lifelong friend of Dr. Sam's. He communicated to me, and I quote, "Most of what I know about Sambo you cannot use at a function such as the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame." He went on to add that he was just kidding, and he told me a couple of stories, and one I will share with you this morning is when television came out, Sambo said it would never enter the Sam's household. His house was next to the Fayetteville Methodist Church, where he taught Sunday school every Sunday. Helen went to Rich's and bought a TV and had the antenna placed on the roof. Sambo hung his underwear on the antenna and said it showed he no longer wore the pants in the family. Dr. Harp goes on to say there must be 500 Sambo stories. Most are true and all are funny. He also says that his friend, Dr. Sam's, has been a tireless doctor and one of his best personal friends and truly deserves this honor. Well, after 3 decades of practicing medicine, Dr. Sam's began to write in 1982. At the age of 60, he published Run with the Horseman, the first semi-autobiographical adventures of his anti-hero, Porter, quote, Sambo Osmond Jr. The book began as a family history to share with his 4 children and 10 grandchildren. It became a national bestseller, as we know, and in 2006 was selected as the inaugural text for the Atlanta Reads program, something of which he is very proud, I know. 6 books followed Run with the Horseman: Whisper of the River, The Widow's Mite, and Other Stories, 2 nonfiction books, The Passing Perspectives of Rural America and Christmas Gift. After a period of writer's block about how to continue with Porter's story, Sam's rounded out his first 2 novels with the third, When All the World Was Young, and it was published in 1991. It won the Townsend Prize for Fiction that year and was performed in 1992 for America's Public Radio's Radio Reader, that is a tongue twister, American Public Radio's Radio Reader. Epiphany, Stories, a volume of 3 philosophical novellas, was published in 1994. Being one not exempt from the human condition of loss and grief, Dr. Sam's writing ceased for 10 years due to family tragedy. He is quoted as saying, "You can grieve only so long, and then you have to return to the ultimate fact that we must rejoice. It's what we were born to do." So last spring, he returned to writing, and we're all looking forward, Dr. Sam's, to his next book, Downtown, which comes out in June. The New Georgia Encyclopedia remarks, and I quote, "With wit, humor, and old-fashioned moralizing, Sam's stories are about unlikely encounters and what people learn from them. A natural storyteller whose works have made him a popular writer in the South and garnered favorable national attention, Pharoah Sams was honored in 2001 for 50 years of commitment and service to the people of Fayette County. Book reviewer Frederick Christian Frank said about him, "Sams is as clever as Twain, as sincere as Charles Perrault, and as connected to his roots as Faulkner. It is indeed an honor for me to present to you Dr. Farrell A. Sams for induction in the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame.
I stand before you under misapprehension. I was notified of this honor by Skip Hewlett with a 2-page, single-spaced, typewritten letter. And in it was a very succinct paragraph of about 2 lines that I took to heart. It said, "You're not expected or required to make any comments." Brevity, I assumed, would be the soul of wit. So I came resolved just to get up here and say thank you and sit down. But Skip's not anybody to be given that sort of advice. And I was told a few minutes ago that I was expected to say something. So I'm going to give the audience choice. I can swing either way. You want something that is serious, or do you want something that is ridiculous? Who votes? Okay, you asked for it. One of the hardest things to write is dialect. It's almost impossible to catch all of the nuances of the individual human voice. And I present to you, Shell and Caroline Miller's granddaughter. How would you capture their accents in writing? And it's difficult to do, and sometimes it's impossible. And I'm reminded of an anecdote that is true. My father was county school superintendent. We were a very impoverished county. His office consisted of 1 room. He had the telephone, and his secretary, Miss Opal, had the typewriter. And they sat across from each other. And Miss Opal's accent is impossible to reproduce in print, but it's very, very vivid, and it's lodged up here. He came to my home about 1954 for lunch. His hair was all awry. He said, "Sambo, I have just hired the first PhD in the history of Fayette County to teach school." And I said, "You've hired a PhD in Fayette County?" "Yes." I said, "What does she teach?" He said, "It's not a she, it's a he." And I said, "Dad, you've hired a male PhD to teach in Fayette County for a salary of $95 a month. The state's going to give us a supplement. He's going to make $110. I said, "Well, if he has a PhD, there are a couple of personality faults he might have." And I listed 2 of them. And he said, "Don't talk about my teachers." And as it turned out, he didn't have either one of those. But we got to that later. But he said, I said, "What's he going to teach?" He said, "Band." I said, "Daddy, we don't have a band." He said, "By God, we're going to get one." So about this time, teachers were hard to get in Fayette County. Previously, we had retired on young girls coming in from Bessie Tift or Milledgeville or Athens for their first year of teaching, and the local swains would flock to them like buzzards. And they would get married and settle down and teach for a generation or 2. But after World War II, they weren't coming again. So he pulled the first corporate raid that I know of in the school system. He instituted in Fayette County, out of the 159 counties in Georgia, the first Social Security program. He said, all these old teachers that are getting ready to retire from Clayton County, Fulton County, Coweta County, Spalding County, they'll be coming in here applying. said, we'll fill our quota of teachers. And indeed he did. He was canny. One of the requirements was that each teacher had to bring in his or her CV, name, social security number, all of this, to the central office so that Miss Opal could type up their applications for Social Security. He didn't trust college graduates with that. And he wanted it done precisely. So here came Dr. Harold H. Douglas in. And I had met the gentleman. He was about 6'2". He looked like a member of Eisenhower's cabinet. He had curly, wavy hair that was impeccably dressed. He wore black suits with white shirts and a black tie, and had this deep, mellifluous voice. And he was an alcoholic, but he didn't. I was right on that, but he didn't have the other proclivities, so we were comfortable with alcoholics. That's just not what we called them. And every family had one or two. And but he came in, and Daddy met him, introduced him to Miss Opal, and said, she'll take care of your application, just go over there. He gave her this little card. She rolled his form into the typewriter, and she started typing, and she said, Dr. Douglas, this says Harold Ho-Ha Douglas. And he said, Ho-Ha, Ho-Ha, certainly not. What do you take me for, an Indian? And she said, well, you have, excuse me, I never saw that name, folk. Can you tell? Said, how do you pronounce it? He said, Hoa. She said, I believe I'd rather be an Indian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Skip. I'm delighted to present Celestine Sibley as a 2007 inductee into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. Celestine was a colleague, a mentor, and a friend during those long ago years that I spent in journalism. And my admiration for her is the same as thousands upon thousands of readers. She was a writer with a rare ability to translate the history of moments into stories of remarkable humanity. To me, the heart of Celestine Sibley's considerable gift was this. She cared for the people she wrote about, and her readers knew it, because they saw reflections of themselves in the portraits and events contained in her stories. They saw who they were, or who they might have been, or who they could be, or who they did not want to be. Few writers have the insight, the compassion, the patience, and the skill to build such mirrors out of words. Here are a few facts of her life as cited in the New Georgia Encyclopedia. She was born in Holly, Florida on May the 23rd, 1914 to Evelyn Barber and Henry Colley. Her mother, who would become well known in her writing as the wise and personable Mother, eventually left Henry and married without benefit of divorce a lumberman from Alabama named Wesley Reeder Sibley. When Celestine was 7, Wesley Sibley adopted her. At the age of 15, Celestine was hired as a weekend cub reporter for the Mobile Press Register. And when she was graduated from high school in 1933, she was given her first full-time paid position at the press, covering everything from welfare to murder. And that was probably a pretty good omen of what her life would be as a writer, as a reporter, that she really covered everything. It was during those years that she met and married James W. Little, a colleague and journalist at the press. In 1936, the two moved to Pensacola, Florida, and Celestine began writing for the Pensacola News Journal. In 1941, James Little accepted a position with the Associated Press in Atlanta and moved his family there. On July the 21st, 1941, Celestine reported for work at the Atlanta Constitution. When World War II erupted less than 6 months later, she found herself in the unique position of becoming one of the first female editors of the Constitution, working under the legendary Graf McGill. It was the beginning of an illustrious career, more than a half-century as a reporter/columnist for the Atlanta Constitution, today recognized, of course, as the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, or the AJC, or to many old-timers, those lying Atlanta newspapers. I won't attempt to tell Celestine's career. My Lord, nobody could do that. She reportedly wrote approximately 10,000 columns and more than 30 books. If you take your calculator to it, the 10,000 columns, if you think conservatively, estimating 2 double-spaced pages per column or article, would result in 66 plus books at 300 pages each. Honors, she had plenty of them. From the first Townsend Award for Fiction to the Ralph McGill Award for Lifetime Achievement in Journalism, from honorary doctorates from Spring Hill College in Mobile and Emory University in Atlanta, to the National Society of Newspaper Columnists Lifetime Achievement Award given just shortly before she died. Yet, awards that were engraved in bronze and placed on plaques paled in value when compared to the thousands of thank you letters she received from readers. Respected, people were in awe of Celestine. From politicians to the power brokers of business, from celebrities to crooks. Remember, this is a woman who inspired the play called Turn Funny, developed by playwright Philip DuPoy, and I think, is Philip here? Is Philip in the audience? Philip in the audience? He was going to be here, I think. How many newspaper people do you know that's ever had a play, done for them? Still, the Celestine Sibley that I knew was simply Celestine of Sweet Apple, Celestine of the typewriter, Celestine of the moment. If she fretted over fame and fortune, she kept it to herself. She was too busy with the world around her to be bothered with a lot of detail related to her personal life. There's a verifiable story that she once needed to buy a new car to replace her old one. So she went to the business manager of the newspaper for help. The business manager, an understanding gentleman, a very nice fellow named Hobart Franks, arranged for her to have an interest-free company loan to be repaid from payroll deductions. 4 years later, she went back to Hobart and said her car had worn out and she needed to get another loan. No, you don't, Franks told her. You paid off your loan 2 years ago, but I just kept deducting because I knew you'd need it again sooner or later. You've got enough money to buy another car right now, Celestine. This shows you how preoccupied she was with work. She had no idea that this loan had been paid off. To attend a book signing with Celestine was an event. Bookstore people went nuts with her because they could never stop her from talking to everybody that came and stood in line. I mean, chewing the fat, as she would call it. She seemed to know everyone, or know of that person's cousin or uncle or grandfather, and with each knowing there would be a special story. One of Celestine's signings could have lasted for days if the people had had the patience for it. Yet it was this fascination with people that enriched her writing, from Peachtree Street, USA, to Deer Store, and a place called Sweet Apple, and Jency, and Children, My Children, and of course her memoir, Turn Funny. Here is a telling reference of her devotion to her profession from the New Georgia Encyclopedia. I love this. As another creative way to support her family, Sibley moonlighted as a true confession and true detective reporter, selling stories with such shocking headlines as, "I wanted to die, and I was a junkie." This is part of her life that I didn't know about, and I'm sorry I didn't. I would have enjoyed discussing her adventures in such far horizons of imagination. Celestine died of cancer at the age of 85 on August the 15th, 1999, less than a month after the publication of her last column on July the 25th. Her first husband, James Little, had died at the age of 45, leaving her with 3 children. She survived her beloved second husband, John Jack Strong, by 11 years. But she was never alone in her Sweet Apple cabin. All she had to do was touch her fingers to the keys of her writing machine, and her life filled with people. I have this personal prejudice about writers. I believe writers are historians, that each story hidden in poems and plays and novels and newspaper columns are the footnotes of our civilization. Those people who make the words have what I call a printer's ink condition, and here is how its infection works. First, it gets on your clothing, usually your shirt or blouse, and then it gets in your blood. And for the few who are blessed, for those who become legends, it seeps into your soul. Celestine Sibley was that. She was a legend. Printer's ink flooded her soul. Her induction into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame brings honor and distinction to all of us. And I'm very delighted that this presentation will be accepted by her grandson, Ted Bazemore. Where is Ted? Ah, here he is, right here, got him. And also, I'd asked earlier about Philip, and he didn't show up at all, because I know you wanted to make a comment about, is this Philip? Oh, Palmer, I'm sorry, yes, Palmer. Will you come and make a comment about Turn Funny? Palmer, I think if I have this correct, is, you're the managing director of the theater? The president director of the theater, Marietta in the Square. That's right, okay.
Thank you, Terry. Yes, I am producing director at Theater in the Square. I am one of those people who did not know Celestine Sibley personally, but I am one of the many, many, many ardent readers who felt as if they knew her quite personally. I'm not from Georgia. I'm originally from Southeast Kentucky. But when I saw the book Turned Funny, using that Southern expression, which I was so familiar with having grown up in Southeastern Kentucky, and had never heard much outside the South, I immediately was drawn to it. And certainly I was not disappointed. So when the theater was about to commemorate its 25th anniversary, we were trying to decide on a project that fitted the occasion. And I immediately thought of adapting Celestine Sibley's Turned Funny into a play. And it was quite well received, so well received, in fact, that we are bringing it back again this summer. And indeed, in fact, we have gone further into Celestine's works, her wonderful Christmas stories, and we are adapting those. The same author, Philip DuPoy, will adapt some of her stories from Especially at Christmas and Sweet Apple Christmas into what we're calling Christmas at Sweet Apple, and that will be, we will stage that this coming holiday season. But I think it's a wonderful thing for us to be able to play a part in continuing to give voice on stage to the wonderful works of Celestine Sibley. Thank you very much, Terry.
Come, Ted. And I am delighted to make this presentation to Ted Bazemore, her grandson. Ted.
My grandmother wasn't a big fan of awards, actually, but I think she'd be very honored by this because of the other inductees. She was a big fan of Carolyn Miller's, and also Dr. Sams was sort of a mythological figure in our household. She always referred to Sambo very affectionately. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for this honor, and I know that among the honors that she received, this is one she would have been very proud to accept. Basically, because of what Skip said earlier, that it honors Georgians, Georgia history, and Georgia culture, and that's what she cared about. If there's anything in this world that she was passionate about, it was those three things. So thank you very much.
And now to introduce our next inductee is the wife, actually, and novelist Cassandra Conroy. Is Cassandra here? There's Cassandra. Okay, I hadn't met her before. Who's here on behalf of Judge and previous inductee Pat Conroy. So it's a pleasure to meet Cassandra, and I give you Cassandra.
First of all, allow me to express Pat's profound regret that he could not be here for his dear friend Ann. He was ill and unable to attend, and I just wanted her to have what he had written out in preparation for being here. And Ann, you will be delighted to know that it is vintage Conroy. It's very subtle, very understated, and but you will not be surprised at that, I know. And it's written the way he writes his novels too, in his yellow paper. I believe that Ann Rivers Siddons has one of the loveliest names ever to write American fiction. And I have always loved it that there are rivers that run through it. In 1973, I met Annie and her husband Hayward at a huge sit-down dinner at the governor's mansion in Atlanta. The party was given by Governor Jimmy Carter to honor Georgia writers, and I did not have the second sight that would let me in on the secret that I would one day witness the induction of Jimmy Carter into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. Nor did I know that I would live long enough to nominate the rapturously beautiful Ann Rivers Siddons into that same hall. Until that magical evening, I had never met a tri-delt from Auburn. And after that evening, I wanted to meet 1,000 more. Annie had not yet published her first book, and my book, The Water is Wide, had just been published in the fall of 1972. Ann Rivers Siddons and I grew up as writers together. I have read every book she has published, some long before their publication date, and this alone makes me a well-read man, for this has been a prolific, high-stepping woman, the world of American letters. Once I wrote that Ann Rivers Siddons has never written a line of prose that did not have music in it. Her prose style is glorious and lit up and multi-layered and a joy to read aloud. A character is set loose in her novels that belongs to Ann Rivers Siddons and to Ann alone. The high-born Southern woman who is not a racist, who despises racism, and who will do everything in her power to cleanse the South of this repellent stain. In her first novel, Heartbreak Hotel, the radiant Maggie DeLoach promised to a K.A. boots, Claiborne, don't you hate his guts already? Writes editorials in her college paper that are pro-civil rights in the 1950s. This doesn't go over too well with the K.A. Boots Claiborne, but it mirrors the life of Ann Rivers Siddons precisely, who was writing editorials in favor of integration in the late 50s at Auburn University. She still remains the only white woman I know who attended the formal dinner to honor Martin Luther King in Atlanta after Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Annie was just a girl then, but bright and sassy and ready to go. Her life and work began with a collection of essays called John Chancellor Makes Me Cry. A Princeton scholar recently told me her essay about her husband's return to Princeton was the greatest piece of writing about homecoming ever written, and even Princeton University agrees. With The House Next Door, Annie tried her hand at a ghost story and managed to scare even Stephen King. I had severe, wintry-eyed librarians in Maine tell me that Colony is the best novel ever written about Maine. There is mystery in this from a woman born and raised in Fairborn, Georgia. But in her oneness with the world lies her genius. I think her novel, Peachtree Road, is the best novel ever written about Atlanta, Georgia, and I think it tells the story of the grandchildren of another member of this Hall of Fame, Margaret Mitchell. As a novelist, Annie takes in everything, devours everything, and her eye is all-seeing and her ear for dialogue is dead on. She can write about a Maine fisherman, a Roman waiter, or a Gullah preacher from South Carolina with perfect ease and familiarity. I attended a wedding with Annie and her husband Hayward in Italy during the late 80s. Though I have never written a word about this wedding, Annie managed to get a whole novel out of it. It is called Hill Towns, and it's superb. But I was talking about Anne's brilliance with dialogue. There is an artist in the book named Sam Forrest, the book Hill Towns, who sounded familiar to me, and I was certain I knew the man. I was halfway through the book when I realized that Sam Forrest was based on me. As a brother novelist, I had to admit that Annie Siddons had caught my character with precise elegance and precision. By the induction of Ann Rivers Siddons, the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame does itself great honor and adds luster to the names of writers who have preceded her. She is the most prolific writer who has ever been inducted into this illustrious hall. Geography has not imprisoned her. She writes as well about Martha's Vineyard as she does about the Outer Banks of North Carolina or her new home, the majestic city of Charleston. Her opening passage in Sweetwater Creek is the loveliest piece of prose I have ever read about the South Carolina Low Country, and I know some things about that subject. My favorite of her novels is Home Place, and I could talk all day about why I revere it so. But no, there is Peachtree Road, and no, again, there is Colony. Ladies and gentlemen, today you honor Ann Rivers Siddons. She is as fine and good a woman as I have ever met, and one of the best friends I have on earth. Please welcome the distinguished and beloved Ann Rivers Siddons, and know that this is a woman and a writer I love with all my heart. Sincerely, Pat Conroy.
Thank you, my dear Sandra. Please tell Patrick when you get home that I'm awfully glad I brought that tube of waterproof mascara yesterday. This is an extraordinary place to fetch up on a beautiful April day for me. And maybe you will recognize, can you all hear me? Maybe you will realize just how extraordinary when I tell you that a long time ago, longer than I'm going to say, I was standing at the opening of a supermarket out by the dirt bike track outside Raleigh, North Carolina, with a stack of books beside me that had not diminished one iota in 3 hours, wondering why on earth anybody would buy a book at a supermarket when they could get it the free sausage biscuits. There was a little old lady, literally in tennis shoes, who to get to the sausage biscuits had to pass me. And on her third lap, she stopped and said, honey, you must need money awful bad. I said, yes, ma'am, I do. And if you'll buy one of these things, we can both go home. And she did, and I did. And I guess I was on my way from dirt bike tracks here. It is perhaps the highest honor I will ever receive, though I wouldn't have given you a plug nickel that day about my making it here. All I can say is I thank all of you who had a part of it just enormously. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to introduce John Stone is Dr. Hugh Ruppersberg, Professor of English at the University of Georgia, a member of the Board of Judges of the Hall of Fame.
Dr. Stone, I don't know you personally, but I do know your work, and I'm very glad to have this opportunity to talk about it and welcome you and members of your family here to the university. Dr. John Stone stands in a distinguished line of doctor poets such as John Keats, and William Carlos Williams, and Daniel Absey. It is tempting when you learn that a cardiologist is also a poet to think that he must be a poet as a hobby or as an avocation, but not as a central calling. But John Stone, in his career as a cardiologist and poet, has joined these two different occupations together in a deep and meaningful way. Poetry heals, he told one interviewer. Mozart heals, Beethoven heals, Picasso heals. Everything human has a possibility of healing if it's applied correctly. Dr. Stone was born in Jackson, Mississippi in 1936. He was an undergraduate at Millsaps College and graduated from there in 1958. He received his MD from Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis in 1962. He completed his residency in medicine and cardiology at the University of Rochester in New York and a fellowship in cardiology at Emory, where he joined the faculty in 1969. He founded the emergency medicine program at Grady Hospital. For 19 years, he was director of admissions and associate dean at Emory University. How you can write poetry after being an associate dean for 19 years, I don't know. And he is now professor emeritus of medicine at Emory. Dr. Stone's list of awards in both medicine and literature is considerable. I'll mention some of them. He was named Best Clinical Professor at Emory on 3 different occasions. He received mastership designation from the American College of Physicians in 2003. That same group gave him the Nicholas E. Davis Memorial Scholar Award for his activities in the humanities. He's twice been named Writer of the Year by the Dixie Council of Authors. He's a recipient of the Governor's Award in the Humanities, of 2 literature awards from the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters, and of a Literary Achievement Award from the Georgia Writers Association. One of the reasons we're honoring Dr. Stone are the volumes of poetry that he has written and published. I'll give you their titles. The Smell of Matches, his first collection in 1972. In All This Rain, published in 1980. Renaming the Streets, 1985. Where Water Begins, 1998. And most recently, from the LSU Press, I believe, Music from Apartment 8, New and Selected Poems. He's also the author of a very fine volume of essays in the country of hearts, Journeys in the Art of Medicine, and has co-edited another collection on doctoring, stories, poems, essays. His work has appeared in a variety of publications, a very diverse variety of publications, such as Poetry, The American Scholar, the New York Quarterly, the Georgia Review, the Southern Review, New England Review, New York Times Magazine, the Journal of the American Association, the American Medical Association, and Poetry Northwest. In the Southern Review in 1991, Sally Harris Sange wrote the following: "If your faith in doctors and hospitals is unwavering, it is because you do not read a morning newspaper. The maligning of the medical profession is Catholic, even within its own borders. Dr. John Stone reminds us there is art alive in medical practice, and that there are practitioners who recognize at once their great power to heal and their vast inability to cure. Responsibility, morality, and ethics are here separated as they should be from legality and are aligned with art, wit, and the aspirations of the human spirit." One of my favorite statements by John Stone, I'll read it now. It goes as follows: "It's possible for every life to be boring, except in the life of the mind. Only to the extent that our minds are alive and kept alive are we truly alive." That's what I believe. It's possible to be a bus driver or a cab driver and still be having a hell of a time. Frost said, "My aim in life is to unite my vocation and avocation as my two eyes make one in sight. The excitement of making the vocation and the avocation one is what keeps us alive and prevents life from becoming dreadfully dull." Dr. Stone's career as a doctor and as a poet, his exploration of the human heart and all its different aspects, unites the humanities, the sciences, and the medical arts in a way whose importance in our day and our age cannot be overstated. So I am pleased to introduce Dr. John Stone.
I want to read two poems. And the first is about my mother, who has been teaching me about aging for many years. She's approaching 99. I wrote a series of poems about her. I just want to read you one of them and finish with a poem with entirely different feeling to it. In December 2001, just after the 9/11 attack, my mother was in an assisted care home in Decatur. And I went by to see her. I was concerned how much she actually remembered, that she was losing some memory. And so I gathered up some information about my father and took it by to visit with her. The poem is called Visitation. Serenity Gardens is the fictitious name of the assisted care home. At Serenity Gardens, winter has surrounded us. My mother's room is way too warm for me, just right for her with an extra sweater. Outside, the uneasy year, her 93rd, lurches through December. She is surely serene in this place, thanks to whatever goodness, queen of the electronic piano. Among my chief duties now, I have become her human calendar, a stay against time, her reach for the past. Each visit, we review the years, we sit and we talk, fragile mother, absent-minded son. This afternoon, I assemble for her some semblance of my long-dead father, the only husband she had. I tell her his story. We study his photograph. Do you remember him? I ask. She looks again. No, she answers softly. No, but isn't he good looking? She smiles, I chuckle, and the gathering dark, we cry a bit together. I for what she has forgotten, she for what I remember. And then the other one came out, recommended itself to me last night. A group of us were sitting together over dinner, and they were talking about their outdoors accomplishments, many of them going down rivers such as the Colorado. I've always thought of myself as an outdoors person. My idea of camping out is in the bathroom in the Hilton. And when my wife and I were raising two children, two sons who are in the audience today, along with one of my daughters-in-law, I convinced them that camping out was accomplished at Callaway Gardens. There, you know, they stock the lake with fish. You can't use worms. You have to use electric boats and plastic worms. I found the purple worm was very effective. This is what happened. My sons were about 10 and 6 at that point. This is called the bass. Because I was 37 and he was 10, I was presumed and of course to know everything important, plus how to take the fish off the hook. I'd been told largemouth and striped bass, both either, waited for us below the still crystal of the lake. I had no expectation, though, of actually catching a fish when somehow we did. After we hauled it heavily in over the gunnels like a glittering glory, no way was I about to touch that wide mouth, those razor fins, gills, those sparkling cold-blooded scales, until all spasms stopped. To this day, my son may think the way to take a fish off the hook is to place it, hook still intact, in the bottom of the boat. Place a paddle over the fish and keep your foot gently but steadfastly on the paddle on the fish. After the flailing and flopping, I managed with something like experience to get the hook out. Then as morning broke over us, we made our slow electric way back to the boathouse. That fish won for us a trophy, which I keep here on my desk to remind me of that morning and of how unexpected the end may be, how hungry, how shining. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our ceremony. I want to thank you all for coming. I also want to correct an oversight from my previous remarks. I forgot to mention one of our judges, Peggy Gallus, who not only is a judge, but also one of the movers in actually starting this program. Peggy, thank you. I want to mention those of you who need a ride back to the parking lot, the shuttle will pick you up where dropped you off. The families and the inductees and the judges, we need to get down to lunch on the 3rd floor as soon as possible so we can move things along. Again, thank you all for coming. I thought it was a delightful program, and I appreciate your attendance. Thank you.